known to passengers on the Ruby Princess, the coronavirus was raging. In the final days of the cruise, Stuart and Julie Edwards celebrated their wedding anniversary and a birthday.
Cheers, happy birthday.
Ken and Kathy Reid saw a show. On the last night, the party continued.
I want to say thank you for cruising with us. Thank you for taking your time. I get it. I'm going to say this a couple more times, but thank you for being positive throughout all this tumultuous time. You have been amazing.
As the ship arrived back in Sydney, 128 people were ill. 24 had temperatures over 38 degrees. 2 were hospitalised. Later that morning, the 2,700 passengers were controversially allowed to disembark. The Ruby Princess was the breeding ground for the biggest cluster of Covid-19 cases in Australia.
Quite hard to breathe too. It sort of gives you quite shortness of breath and tightness in the chest. And you had actually pain on the chest.
I would like this to breathe.
Ken and Kathy both tested positive.
Bad fever, terrible fatigue, headaches, body aches.
I just felt lousy, absolutely shot. I knew I was sick. I didn't realise how sick.
Stuart Edwards spent 3 weeks in hospital battling Covid-19.
In the middle of the night, I couldn't breathe. It was just that. I thought, if this doesn't go away, I'm not going to make it. Terrible. I could just die. I could not wake up in the morning. Simple as that.
On the Ruby Princess, more than 900 passengers and crew contracted the virus. 28 died.
They didn't warn passengers about the risks they faced. Carnival, we say, would have known about those risks. They had been through the Diamond Princess experience in Japan. They had been through the Grand Princess experience in California. They had 160 passengers on the previous cruise that had symptoms consistent with coronavirus. They would have known about the risks, we say. They didn't warn passengers whatsoever.
It shouldn't have been allowed to proceed. There's no way in the world. It's crazy.
So I blame Princess Cruises for starting the cruise on the 8th of March. They knew they had a sick person on board at that stage, and they still went ahead.
The fact that the Ruby Princess still sailed is actually alarming, and it should be borderline criminal that they still sailed, because it should have been so crystal clear to them that this was going to be a catastrophe waiting to happen.
As the virus spread, cruises were in turmoil across the globe.
You are requested to stay in your cabin and to communicate any possible fever symptoms to the front desk.
We don't know whether it's the flu or the coronavirus.
So many countries have refused us entry. We could be stuck out here forever. We need help.
The ship has been quarantined. I can't really believe it.
At the bottom of the world, one cruise line thought it was immune to Covid-19. The Greg Mortimer runs expedition cruises to the Antarctic. The ship was due to set sail from Tierra del Fuego in Argentina.
I wanted to get out and experience, and the Greg Mortimer ticked all the boxes.
Anthony Phillips has spent 30 years in the travel industry. Antarctica was next on his bucket list.
I was exuberant. I was doing a countdown. The white continent is like nothing else.
Jan Richards joined her friend on the adventure.
I wouldn't regard myself as what I'd call a scaredy cat. But I didn't see it as being a risk because there were no warnings out. I was very careful and did my research. We all did.
March 14. The pandemic had just been declared. The day before departure, the CDC issued their no-sail order in the US and recommended against cruising worldwide.
None of the ships were leaving, except for ours. That kind of tweaked a little bit. And we had also run the company before we even left Australia and said, are you still going? And they said yes, and if you cancel, you're going to lose all your money. It was a lot of money. The CEO of the company was there. And he said, no, you're about to go to the safest place in the world.
He had told us it was the safest place to be, that Antarctica was COVID-free.
The Greg Mortimer, with 114 passengers paying around $22,000 a head, was one of the last cruise ships to sail during the pandemic.
See you in a few weeks, take corona-free.
We all felt quietly confident that it was all fine, not knowing that within an hour of us leaving port, that Argentina was closing its borders. I personally find it very hard to believe that they weren't aware that the borders were about to close.
The ship's owners say they acted on all the information available and consulted widely. But their own doctor gave them clear advice.
I was very nervous. My advice from the captain and the company is very dangerous, and I'm feeling a lot of stress because of this coronavirus situation.
Dr. Mauricio Usme had 20 years experience in emergency medicine.
And they know at that time that it's not good idea because the epidemic condition in all the world was very bad.
They minimised the risk of infection by we weren't allowed into dining room or any public areas without washing our hands, and they had antiseptic everywhere. But I believe they should have just dropped any kind of buffet at all, because that, of course, is like a petri dish.
1 week into the adventure, the trip was upended.
The first patient with fever began March 22, and the lady had 38.4 Celsius degrees fever. Immediately, my diagnosis was a possible patient with coronavirus illness. I went to the bridge, I spoke with the captain, I told him we need to activate immediately the protocol.
From there on in, we were in lockdown. Of course, very quickly people started dropping like flies.
Next day, I had 3 or 4 patients with fever. And every day we had minimum 3 or 4 persons more with fever.
The diseased ship was finally allowed to berth in Uruguay.
On the day we arrived, I noticed all the ambulances lined up to greet the ship. I saw somebody wrapped in bandages with oxygen tanks in a wheelchair. Only later did I find out that person was my friend Mauricio, the doctor. That just really, even now, it really affects me.
I got the infection. They put me 50% die or 50% still alive.
The 217 passengers and crew were tested for Covid-19.
Very quickly we found out that 60% of us were positive. I was shocked that it was positive.
55-year-old crew member Ronnie Lorenzo was gravely ill.
I was in the intensive care unit with Ronnie. We got the infection at the same time. Ronnie died April 17. This news from the hospital was a disaster.
Just goes to show ships are petri dishes. You know, it doesn't matter what safeguards you take. You can't get away from things like that, which goes back to the original thing, the ship should never have left.
There's no way on God's green earth that there wasn't going to be a gigantic problem on those ships. It should have been so crystal clear to them that this was going to be a catastrophe waiting to happen.
I find it a little hard to believe that whilst other companies were cancelling, they didn't, and I'd really like to understand why they made that decision. They played roulette with my health. and in fact, maybe my life.